You might think the USFL draft has nothing to do with the NFL, but I'm going to tell you how this spring draft has everything to do with the draft stock of our HBCU players in April. Also, did Coppin State just pull off the upset of the year versus Norfolk State? Oh yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives right here. There we go. Even with my eyes closed, I got it. Come on, man. Even with my eyes closed, I'm still pointing. But anywho, let's calm down. Let's regroup. Let's get to the show. Let's push forward. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more by visiting the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network at FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Remember, make every moment more. In the USFL draft, not right now, a little bit delayed, but the USFL draft will let us know exactly what we need to know about the draft stock of our HBCU prospects. Not right now, not today, sitting here in February. Speaking of which, I had no idea that this draft was starting so soon. When I said on either yesterday or the day before's episode that the USFL draft is right around the corner, I believe I said that on Monday's episode, I had no idea that February was about to come to a close. I don't know. This month right here is just flew for me. February has been ridiculously fast. I had no idea that this draft was coming up like that. And it's here. I think it might be over. I don't know. It's all on social media, so it's not the most organized in my opinion, but it's here nonetheless. And when I seen Isaiah Land was drafted, I said, Isaiah Land drafted to the USFL? I had to look into that. I had to look in that because I understand that Isaiah Land is a great player, but let's be real. I think he should be the first player drafted in the NFL draft from an HBCU. I'm not thinking about the USFL. So why pick him? I don't know. That's a club franchise decision. But here's the important part, is that they are eligible for the NFL draft. And it's going to be decision time. And that decision time is going to be everything that we need to know about the draft stock of our HBCU players. But let's set a scene. You know we got to set a scene first. Also, the most important part is that we do know that they're going to play professional ball. There's 3 places you can play professional ball in America now. The NFL, the XFL, in the USFL. Now, if you can play in the NFL, you go to the NFL draft. If you feel like you're going to get drafted, you go to the NFL draft. If you feel like you can make a roster, you try your hand at the NFL draft. But let's say those things don't apply to you. Now you go to the XFL, but that's not really the case if you're a new prospect. If you just graduated in the fall, or maybe you're graduating now, whatever the case is, that's not really your situation because the XFL, they already started their season. It just isn't conducive to players who just graduated or just played in the fall. That's why you see the tryouts, everything for the XFL that we were hyping up. That was all in 2022. The tryouts were in like the spring of 2022. Now we're in the spring of 2023, or really the winter still, but the winter, spring of 2023, and they're playing football. So this is for HBCU prospects who had already graduated a year prior. The USFL has that group of players, but then you also add the fact that they have players who have not graduated, who just graduated and played in the fall. We have 12 HBCU players who were drafted, and I'll list them off pretty quick in the USFL draft. Isaiah Bowden, J.J. Holloman, Isaiah Land, Dejon Warren, Keenan Isaac, Derek Tucker, Darius Hagens, Jermaine McDaniels, Andrew Farmer II, Mark Evans II, Dre Terry, and Ray Estes. I hope I said that name right. I hope I did. I don't think I did, but I hope that I did. Anyway, for those 12 players, it's decision time. What you going to do? Are you going to accept that USFL offer, or are you going to try your hand at the NFL. But I know what you're asking yourself if you're listening. Didn't you just say you could do both? You can do both. But I think that is a terrible decision. It's one that many people will do. But if you can avoid it, and there's ways to avoid it that we're going to talk about, if you can avoid it, don't do it. That's how I feel about it. Because I can sit here and tell you what I think a draft stock is. I can sit here and tell you what my ears are hearing. But there's nothing like what those players are hearing. These players are talking to the coaches. These players are talking to the GMs. They're the ones being reached out to. Nobody knows the draft stock better than these players, or at least has a better grasp of the draft stock than these players. Only people who know that are probably the teams, and they're not all aligned on what they feel. So the player knows who has a little bit of interest in them. If the player isn't getting those phone calls, go to the USFL. Period. If you ain't getting them phone calls, go to the USFL and take that as an opportunity to get into the NFL. Use that as an opportunity to showcase what you can do again. It's like a G League. I seen it compared to a G League on Twitter the other day. That's what this is essentially. Got to use it as such. But the reason I say it's decision time, the reason I wouldn't do both is because the USFL season starts about 2 weeks prior to the NFL draft. Now, let's just say you're not drafted and you go through the undrafted free agent process. That could be another week that you might sit there idly. You're looking at all of preseason action, not actual games, but getting in there, working out, learning the playbook, all of those things. And then you're looking at 2 to 3 weeks of action that you're going to physically miss. Then once you arrive, now you have to get acclimated to everything going on. Then you probably have a couple of players, not even probably, you have a couple of players at your position who know the playbook better than you. You got a couple of people at your position, at least one who's starting and might just look good ahead of you. You're just starting at a disadvantage. So there'll be players who are on the fence who think they might get an opportunity. And if you think you're going to get an opportunity, I completely understand. But if you haven't been getting those calls, go to the USFL and try to get those calls next year. It's way smarter than wasting a month and a half to not get in the NFL. I'm not in these men's shoes. I'm not. But I would tell you what I would do. And I would assess the situation myself, see who's giving me a call, see who's not giving me a call, and then I will make my decision based off of that. And going forward, is this the upset of the year? Coppin State just knocked off Norfolk State. Let me say that again. Coppin State just knocked off Norfolk State, and the question should be, is this the upset of the year? Well, you let me know as we continue with Locked on HBCU. And as we continue with our episode, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And FanDuel is the #1 sports book of the podcast or the Locked On Podcast Network. They have all the best odds. I'm talking about draft odds. I'm talking about basketball odds, baseball, hockey, any sport that is your cup of tea. They have it right here on FanDuel. It's very easy. If we're talking about single game parlays, if we're talking about just over-unders of, I think this person's going to hit this many points, I think they're going to have this many goals in this game, go to FanDuel. If you feel like you know what you're talking about, go to FanDuel, make some money on it. Nobody wants to sit, or everybody wants to make a little bit of money and say, oh, I was right. What better way of feeling validated than with a little bit of change? You let me know. And in the meantime, go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more. And as we continue with today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball. It's everything that you need around the sport in one place. Go ahead and check out my guy Isaac. He's doing great work. You can check it out wherever you listen to your podcast. Now I want to talk about Coppin State versus Norfolk State because I think this is the upset of the year. What you think? How you feeling? And I know a big story out of this, and I hate that I have to start it this way, but there's going to be some people who try to place an asterisk on this. I understand why you might do that. But there's going to be a lot of people who try to do this. And the asterisk is the fact that Joe Bryant was injured and missed half the game. He only played 18 minutes. And it's not because of foul trouble. Like Chris Bankston, he had 4 fouls. He only played about 23 minutes. You can chalk that up to foul trouble. Yeah, Joe Bryant was injured. And I will credit, I will acknowledge that. It would be irresponsible not to. But I don't think it's enough. I don't think that him being injured is enough to take away the upset or the upset of the year claim. Of course, I always want to know what you guys think. But Coppin State knocked off Norfolk State. That's the undeniable truth. That's the black and white version of this. So let's talk about it, because a lot of people wouldn't have seen that coming. I wouldn't blame you. I don't know anybody who saw that coming. Even Coppin State fans ain't see that coming. That's how I feel. Tell me if I'm wrong. And Joe Bryant was injured. I understand that. Only played 18 minutes. It wasn't even foul trouble or anything like that. I get it. But I'm going to tell you at the end of this segment why I don't think that's enough to take away the upset claim, or the fact that, to me, this is the upset of the year. I still feel that way. Coppin State knocked off Norfolk State. You can talk about this, that, and the third that led to this result, but black and white, the end result is that Coppin State knocked off Norfolk State in a game that I don't think a lot of people gave them a chance. Not even their own fans. No one saw this coming on Norfolk State's senior night, nonetheless. So I want to shout out Brandon Olson, host of Locked On Gators, because he threw a little idea into the Locked On group chat. And he was just basically like, hey, y'all, check out your team's middle eight. Look at how they do. And it was trying to track a trend. But I don't have a team. I have multiple conferences, right? So I have so many to talk about. I'm not going to track the trends of everybody's middle eight. But for some reason, I decided to check out the middle eight in this game. And this was one of the better middle eight. For those who don't know, the middle eight is the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half. But like, this middle eight was ridiculous. If you want to ask yourself, where did the tide shift? At what point did Coppin State take over the momentum from Norfolk State and just run with it? It's this middle eight. They outscored Norfolk State 24-4 in the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half. They went from being down 11 to being up 9, and never did they relinquish that lead afterwards. So now the question becomes, because that's how they won. I talked about that. But the question becomes, when I say upset of the year, am I being a prisoner of the moment? Am I so close to the date that it happened that I'm using recency bias to call it the upset of the year? Am I just strictly exaggerating? Am I taking it too far? These aren't questions for me. I've answered these questions for myself already. These are questions for you. Do you think that I'm doing these things? And if you do, you likely don't agree that this is the upset of the year. So I'll ask a plain question. Is this the upset of the year? Simple and plain. We can talk about all the metrics that make it not or make it what it is. But to you, is this the upset of the year? Now, I set a scene. I love setting scenes, love telling pictures or telling stories and framing pictures. But Norfolk State comes into this game, second place in the MEAC, a strong argument for the best team in the MEAC, a strong argument they should be number one in the MEAC. Coppin State comes into this game with one victory over the other team that's right above them, now tied with them. South Carolina State has 2 wins on the season. These two teams that beat each other. That's each one of their win. This is not a team that has a good resume. This is not a team that's won. So this is a team that is at the bottom of the conference. Not even in the same, like, we're not even looking at these two teams as if they're in the same ballpark. Matter of fact, when they played last, they weren't in the same ballpark. Norfolk State won by 31 points. So if Norfolk State won by 31 last time they played, one team's at the top of the conference, arguably the best team. One team's at the bottom, arguably the worst team. What are we discussing? No chance. That's what you got. The word to Vince McMahon. Piece of crap, but word to Vince McMahon nonetheless. You look at this game and how it transpired. I told you that. We look at what the lead up to this game was. We look at that. Both matter. I think the lead up is way more important when discussing how big of an upset it is, because you got to set the stage on why you didn't believe this could happen. But the actual gameplay matters as well. Less to me, a lot less. But looking at this, no one gave him a chance. Norfolk State opened up a big lead, 14 points. There's still like 7 minutes left in the game, or 7 minutes left in the first half. I don't believe that as a choke job or anything. I think people give too much credit to early game leads. But let me tell you why Joe Bryant is not an excuse for this not being the upset of the year. Because he played 18 minutes. He came in to the game. There was still 13 minutes left. He played the last 13 minutes of the game. They were only down 6. He was active. He just wasn't successful. And of course, some of that could have had to do with the injury. We won't know how much of it was, how much of it wasn't. But simple and plain, he was there with a chance to win. A good amount of time to win. I don't want to hear any other excuses. Not acknowledging that he missed a lot of the game would be disingenuous. It would. This isn't me sitting here saying Norfolk State isn't a good team. I personally think they should have still beat Coppin State without Joe Bryant. So it's still an upset. Let me know what you think. Is Joe Bryant's injury enough? The fact that he was gone for half of the game. To me, the fact that he showed up in the clutch, he was present, he was a part of the team that could not buy a bucket. All of those things factor into how much I weigh his time away against Norfolk State. To me, this is the upset of the year, at least in the MEAC. At least in the MEAC. You let me know what you think, though. Y'all already know the drill. I want to hear you guys. Now, going forward, we're going to talk about how the CIAA tournament was saved for me. I had no hope after the first men's game, but then I was able to watch Livingstone versus Elizabeth City State, and my faith was restored. We'll talk about that as we continue with Locked on HBCU. And as we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked on HBCU, thank you. This is a personal thing. I always thank you guys, but I want to personally thank Livingstone and Elizabeth City State, because I could sit here and tell you about the numbers, and I will. I'll tell you about those things. Those things are important, and they shaped why it was a good game. But I was just thankful to see a good game. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to watch the women's. So this is not at all an indictment upon the women. To me, this is all about the fact that the first men's game between Bowie State and Shaw was terrible. It was bad basketball. Bad basketball. Now, you have to understand, I said things about Shaw. CIAA games are not easy to find. I don't get to make many, I don't get to watch many of them, but I was able to judge the resume of Shaw. And when I seen that they were able to beat some good teams, I see they were able to take some good teams to the limit, I started making statements, start assuming what they could be. Then I watched them on that court last night, and I'm sitting there asking all them questions like, is this the same team? But you know what? Teams have off days. So I'm going to allow them to have an off day and not press them and just say, you know what? This is the same team that took Virginia Union to the limits. I'm going to trust that's what they are. I'm going to trust that's what they are, instead of what I saw on Wednesday night or Tuesday night. Terrible. But let's talk about the game that woke me up, the game that brought me back. Because I lied. I'm back to it. That game was terrible offense, and not because of good defense. Easy shots being missed. Bad offense. At one point, they're shooting 8% and 31%. No, 25%. They bumped it up to 11 and 34 or something like that. And this is deep into the first half. This is unacceptable. This is bad offense. I thought Bowie State was going to come back. If Bowie State would have came back, I would have talked about the game and called it comeback of the year. We'd have the upset of the year and the comeback of the year, strictly because they made it from a game that wasn't watchable, a game where they couldn't buy a bucket with a pocket full of 20s, to a game in which they were able to come back and come up victorious. Do not allow Shaw 60-something points at the end of the game make you think that they were getting some sort of offense together. They weren't. They weren't. If Shaw is going to want to be the championship contender, be competing with the high-level teams the same way they were doing in the regular season, there is no way they can play basketball like they did in the opening round. I'm not saying something that I don't think they already know or something that their coach did not already tell them. If you as a Shaw fan have a problem with me saying that, let's be realistic. Let's be realistic and call it what it is. Your team did not play well. I'm not calling them garbage, but that was a terrible performance. Now, let's move to something a little bit more positive, and let's end this on a happy note, because Elizabeth City State versus Livingstone was a really good game. I'm not even going to refer back to the first one like I had planned on. This was a really good game, and I could look at the numbers. Detienne Leach for Livingstone, 26 points. Kyrie Temple had a strong second half for Livingstone. Amadou Faye had a double-double with 6 blocks on the game for Elizabeth City State. Jaquante Harris had a big game for Elizabeth State. I could look at those type of numbers. I could look at those type of aspects and say, you know what? I got good, high, efficient basketball. But anytime they were missing, it felt like good defense was being played. I don't care what the numbers are. Throw a double-double out of there. Throw 19 points out of there. Throw 20-something points out of there. I don't care about any of that. And let me just put it on, because I watched this whole game and I didn't care anything about the stat totals. The only reason I even looked at the stat totals was because I wanted to give you the stats. But this point has nothing to do with stats. It had it had much to do with the fact that I was sitting there like, I don't know what's going to happen. Once again, not with the women. I did not get a chance to watch those games because I've been so busy, man. I just been ripping and running all day yesterday. I'm going to have a lot of ripping and running to do today. I'm going to hope to try to catch some of it, though. They restored my faith. They made me happy. They had me in on a good note. I was very happy to watch that game. So thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth City State. Thank you, Livingstone. Unfortunately for Livingstone, they weren't able to come up with a victory. They were only able to, you were only able to keep it close. And at the end, it was one of those games where, man, if that 3 just falls, you might be going into overtime, or maybe Elizabeth City State needs a chance to steal, or they steal like it's Family Feud, but maybe they need a chance to, come back from your dagger 3 or your game tying 3 to have a dagger 3 of their own. Like it's everything, but this was a good game, came down to the wire, good basketball. And I'm just happy to see that. Good movement, good defense, good shots, like good changes, like back and forth. Feeling like either team could get it. They started off a little bit slow. I blame the first game. But once they got into their rhythm, they got to rocking and rolling. So I was very appreciative. Anyway, I've given my gratitude enough, but just know I can't say it enough. But thank you to them anyway. And thank you for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Basketball. It's everything you need around that sport in one place. On tomorrow's episode, we're going to talk about how even though Norfolk State lost this game, and it seems like a big deal because I call it the upset of the year, Howard lost too. Matter of fact, I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but so did Maryland Eastern Shore. The top of the MEAC was really faltering on Monday, but we're definitely going to be discussing Howard and the Legacy Bowl and everything going forward on this week of Locked On HBCU. So make sure you guys are staying tuned to the episodes. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.